The rain drummed steadily on the tin roof of the small convenience store as Sophia Chen pushed open the glass door, the bell jingling softly behind her. 21 years old, final-year education student, fair olive skin glowing faintly under the fluorescent lights, long straight black hair pulled into a practical ponytail that still managed to escape in wispy strands around her face. She wore her everyday armor, a slightly oversized navy hoodie with the university logo faded almost to gray. Light-wash jeans worn soft at the knees from countless hours sitting cross-legged on library floors, and white sneakers that had seen better days but still carried her faithfully through the city. In her left hand she carried her own dinner, a single steamed pork bun wrapped in thin paper, still warm. In her right, the second bag, a chicken sandwich on soft bread, a crisp red apple, and a small thermos filled with ginger tea she had poured herself because the forecast promised the temperature would drop after midnight. She stepped into the evening, hood up against the drizzle, and followed the familiar route through the narrow side streets to Evergreen Park. The path was lit only by sporadic street lamps and the occasional glow from apartment windows above. 7 months ago she would have hurried past the shadowed corners without a second glance. Now every step felt purposeful. There, on the same weathered wooden bench tucked beneath the drooping branches of an old willow, sat the man she had come to know simply as Victor. Threadbare gray wool coat patched clumsily at the elbows and cuffs, dark brown hair matted from days without a proper wash, short beard streaked with premature silver, green eyes usually fixed on the ground until he sensed her approach. Tonight he looked smaller somehow, shoulders curved inward as though trying to take up less space against the cold. Sophia set the paper bag gently beside him without speaking at first. She sat on the opposite end of the bench, close enough to talk, far enough to respect the invisible boundary they had both silently agreed upon. She unwrapped her own bun, steam curling into the damp air. "You're late," Victor said quietly, not accusing, just stating a fact. His voice carried the roughness of someone who spoke little during the day. "Professor kept us discussing lesson plans for underprivileged schools," she answered. "I lost track of time." A small smile tugged at her lips. "But I didn't forget you." He opened the bag slowly, almost reverently, and the scent of warm chicken and fresh bread drifted between them. "You never do." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the rain a steady background rhythm. Then, as always happened, words began to fill the space. "I presented my final project proposal today," Sophia said. "An after-school reading and tutoring program for kids whose parents work night shifts. Nothing fancy, just books, snacks, someone who listens." The panel seemed interested, but she trailed off, picking at the edge of her bun wrapper. "They asked how I planned to fund it. I didn't have a good answer." Victor turned his head slightly toward her. "You'll find a way. People like you always do." She laughed softly, a little self-conscious. "People like me usually end up teaching in overcrowded classrooms for salaries that barely cover rent." "Maybe," he said. "But the world needs more teachers who remember what it feels like to be hungry for more than food." Sophia looked at him then, really looked. In the dim light his eyes held a depth that always surprised her, as though he had lived several lives before landing on this bench. That first evening had been pure impulse. Late October, after a 12-hour day between lectures and her part-time job shelving books, she had seen him sitting against the park wall, coat collar turned up, staring at nothing. Most people walked past. Something in the set of his shoulders made her stop at the corner store instead. She bought the extra sandwich without fully understanding why and placed it near his feet. He had looked up, startled, and murmured the quietest "thank you" she had ever heard. The next night she came again. And the night after. Months passed like pages turning slowly. She learned the rhythm of his silences, the way his fingers curled protectively around whatever food she brought as though afraid it might vanish. He learned hers, the slight lift of her chin when she was trying not to cry, the way she talked faster when she was excited about an idea. Winter arrived with biting wind. One December evening Sophia brought thick wool gloves she had found at a charity stall. "Your hands always look cold," she said simply, cheeks flushed from more than the weather. Victor slid them on, flexing his fingers inside the soft wool. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, very quietly, "The last pair of gloves anyone gave me was my mother. 23 years ago. Christmas morning. She died 3 weeks later." Sophia's throat tightened. She reached out instinctively, hesitated, then rested her hand lightly over his gloved one. "I'm sorry." He turned his palm up so their fingers laced together, just for a second, before he gently pulled away. But the touch lingered in the air between them like an unspoken promise. Their conversations deepened with the season. Victor spoke in fragments of a past he kept carefully guarded, a family business that had grown too fast, partners who smiled while sharpening knives, nights when the numbers on screens felt more real than people. He never named the company, never mentioned money, only the weight of being wanted for what he could provide rather than who he was. Sophia shared her own ghosts. Her mother's long illness when she was 15, the hospital bills that swallowed their savings, the way her father had disappeared into grief and then into another city entirely. The scholarship that kept her in school but left no room for error. The fear that if she failed, everything her mother had fought for would mean nothing. One snowy night in January they sat so close their shoulders touched. Sophia had brought 2 thermoses of soup. Victor drank slowly, savoring each sip. "You know," he said after a long silence, "I used to think kindness was a currency. Something you spent to get something back. You've taught me it can just be." Sophia looked down at her hands. "I don't give because I expect anything. I give because when I see you here, I see someone who deserves to be warm. To be seen." He turned to her then, green eyes steady. "You make me feel human again, Sophia. Not invisible." Their hands found each other that night, tentative, careful, but sure. Fingers intertwined beneath the edge of his coat. Neither spoke of it afterward, but the memory stayed like heat in their palms. Then came the first disappearance. It happened on a brutally cold Tuesday in late January. Sophia arrived with hot noodle soup and found the bench empty. No coat. No shadow. Just swirling snow and silence. She waited until her teeth chattered and her fingers turned numb, calling his name until her voice cracked. Nothing. The next night, the same. And the next. Panic settled in her chest like ice. She searched the park, the nearby alleys, asked the overnight security guard at the university gate if he had seen the man in the gray coat. No one had. Sleep became impossible. Food tasted like ash. Her grades slipped, her advisor pulled her aside with worried eyes. But all she could think was, had he been hurt? Arrested? Had he simply decided one more sandwich wasn't worth returning for? 8 days later, under a pale dawn sky, she found him back on the bench. Coat dirtier than before, a fresh bruise shadowing his left cheekbone and temple, lip split at the corner. "Victor," her voice broke as she hurried forward. He stood quickly, hands raised. "I'm sorry. I should have found a way to tell you. There was an emergency. From before. I couldn't ignore it." She reached up without thinking, fingertips hovering near the bruise. "You're hurt. It looks worse than it is." He caught her wrist gently, not pushing her away, just holding. "But being gone, knowing you were coming here every night, waiting, felt worse than any punch." Tears spilled over before she could stop them. "Don't do that again. Please. Just, don't disappear." "I won't," he whispered, pulling her into the briefest, fiercest embrace. His coat smelled of wet wool and city streets and something indefinably him. When they stepped apart, both were shaking. From that night forward something irrevocable had changed. Friendship had quietly become something deeper, more fragile, more necessary. They sat closer. Their silences felt fuller. When their hands brushed passing food, neither pulled away quickly. When she laughed at one of his dry observations, he watched her with unguarded wonder. Spring brought cherry blossoms that drifted like pale confetti across the paths. Victor began bringing small things in return. A smooth river stone he said reminded him of her quiet strength, a folded square of newspaper with a short poem he had written in the margins about light finding its way through the smallest cracks. Sophia read it aloud one evening, voice trembling, tears shining in her eyes when she finished. "You wrote this?" she asked. "For you," he answered simply. One golden April twilight they sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the sun sink behind the skyline. Victor turned to her. "Every day you come here," he said softly, "you remind me there are still people who choose kindness when no one is watching. That matters more than you know." Sophia swallowed hard. "And every day you listen, you remind me I'm not alone in wanting to make things better." He lifted his hand slowly, brushed a blossom petal from her hair, then let his fingers linger against her cheek. "You are the best part of my day, Sophia. The only part that feels real." Their foreheads touched. Breaths mingled. For one suspended heartbeat the entire world narrowed to just them. But doubt began to whisper. One humid May evening after she left him with fresh strawberries, because he had once mentioned missing their tartness, Sophia paused at the park gate and glanced back. A long black car eased to the curb beside the bench. Two men in dark suits stepped out, postures deferential, voices low and urgent. Victor looked around once, almost guiltily, then slid into the back seat. The car pulled away smoothly into traffic. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Who were they? Why did they speak to him like someone important? She returned the next night anyway. And the night after. Their conversations carried new sweetness, lingering glances, soft touches, words layered with meaning. Yet the question burned quietly beneath every moment. Who was he, really? Then came the second vanishing. A warm Friday in late May. Sophia arrived carrying a small container of sliced mango and sticky rice she had made herself, her mother's recipe, the one comfort food she still knew by heart. The bench was empty. No sign of him. No coat left behind as a signal. Nothing. She waited until the park lights flickered on, until families packing up picnics gave her curious glances, until the night grew thick around her. Panic returned sharper than before, this time laced with betrayal. Had the men in suits taken him? Had he gone willingly? Had everything, the sandwiches, the conversations, the almost kisses, been a mirage? 3 days dragged past in agony. She barely slept, barely ate. On the morning of the fourth day she walked to the bench one last time, telling herself this was goodbye. Victor stood there. But the gray coat lay folded on the ground at his feet. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt open at the collar, dark hair neatly combed and trimmed, face clean-shaven, every line of him speaking of power held quietly in check. Yet his green eyes were the same, nervous, hopeful, terrified. "Sophia," he said. His voice cracked on her name. The container slipped from her fingers. Mango and rice scattered across the grass. He took one step forward, hands raised. "Please don't run. Just, listen. For 1 minute." She stayed rooted, chest heaving. "My name is Victor Hale," he continued, words tumbling out as though he had rehearsed them 1,000 times. 7 months and 12 days ago I walked away from the company I built. From the boardrooms, the private jets, the endless people who wanted pieces of me. I put on the oldest coat I owned and came here to disappear. To see if anyone, could still look at me and see a person instead of a fortune. Sophia's lips parted, but no sound came. "I never expected to find you," he said. "I never expected someone to show up every single day with food they could barely afford themselves. To talk to me like I mattered. To worry when I was gone. To cry when I was hurt. You didn't know there would ever be a reward. You did it anyway. Tears streamed down her cheeks now, hot and fast. You lied to me. I hid, he corrected gently. There's a difference. I hid because I was afraid if you knew, everything would change. That you'd see the money instead of the man who sat here freezing, grateful for every word you gave me. She shook her head, voice trembling. I worried. I thought you were dead. Twice. I searched for you. I cried myself to sleep thinking I'd lost you. Victor dropped to one knee, not in grand romantic gesture, but in raw surrender. I know. And I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. The first time I left it was a crisis at the company I couldn't ignore, lawsuits, threats to people who still depended on me. The second time, I had to finish it. Resign. Transfer control. Liquidate what I could quietly. Walk away clean so I could come back here with nothing left to hide. He looked up at her, eyes glistening. I'm not asking you to forget the hurt. I'm asking, begging, you to believe that every moment we shared was real. The man in the coat was me. The man in this suit is still me. And I love you, Sophia. Not because you fed me. Because you saw me when no one else did. Because you made me want to be better. Because you are the only home I've ever wanted. Silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. Sophia sank slowly to her knees in the grass so they were eye level. She reached out, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw, smooth now, no beard, yet still so familiar. I fell in love with the soul who sat on this bench every night, she whispered. Coat or no coat. Billionaire or nobody. Just you. Victor exhaled a shaky breath and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, burying her face against his shoulder, feeling the steady thunder of his heart beneath the fine fabric. They held each other there on the damp ground as the park slowly woke around them, birds calling, distant laughter, the city breathing. Months later Sophia walked hand in hand with Victor along the same park path. No bench required anymore. She still carried sandwiches sometimes, not for him, but for the new faces who appeared in corners, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched. Victor funded her after-school program quietly, no splashy donations, no plaques with his name, just enough to buy books, hire tutors, keep the lights on. Their love grew the way strong things do, slowly, steadily, rooted deep in the soil of shared hardship and shared hope. And in the quiet evenings, when doubt tried to creep back in, they returned to the bench, sat close, and remembered, sometimes the greatest wealth arrives wrapped in ordinary kindness. Sometimes the heart that gives without expecting return receives more than it ever dreamed possible. True love is not found in golden towers or perfect circumstances. It is built on cold benches, shared sandwiches, honest silences, and the brave decision to see, and to let yourself be seen, exactly as you are. If this story reached into your heart, moved you, reminded you of the power of small kindnesses, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing. Your support helps more stories like this find their way to people who need them most. Thank you for being here.